Kevin McGee, you've been at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals for just about 2 years now in the Chief Executive role. And I think it's fair to say it's been a tough 2 years for the NHS. You've had, of course, the COVID backlog of operations and appointments to deal with. And then last winter, a really high demand for services. And now, of course, this year, the pressure of the nurses and doctors' strikes as well. Do you feel in some ways that you've been constantly firefighting and so standing still during your time at the Trust?
So it's fair to say the last 2 years have been immensely challenging for Lancs Teaching, but for the NHS generally. We've had the COVID backlog from elective recovery, from cancer recovery. We've had the worst winter that the NHS has ever been through, and over the last sort of 6 months or so, we've been dealing with all the industrial action. But I'm really proud of the way the organisation's performed in spite of those pressures. We've continued to develop the services, we've continued to support staff, and we're in a really good and strong space in spite of the pressures that the NHS is under. And that's testimony to the brilliant work of the staff who work for Lancashire Teaching Hospitals.
You've always been quite candid throughout your time at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals about the need for the NHS to transform. Do you really think that it's geared up for the transformation you believe is necessary? And when the new Royal Preston opens in probably a decade's time from now, how do you think services will look in Central Lancashire?
So there's a lot of hard work that needs to be done between now and the opening of the new hospital, and don't underestimate what the work will be. However, the NHS has continually changed, it's continually evolved. If I look at what the NHS was like when I first started, it was completely different to how it looks now. We had a proliferation of smaller hospitals, we had lots of separate hospitals. Now there's much more sort of concentration. So what I think I would like to see in Lancs and South Cumbria is a really outstanding, world-class tertiary hospital providing all of the specialist services for the residents of Lancashire and South Cumbria, that has education and training and research and development wrapped around it, that attracts the best and the brightest staff, allows an inflow of resources into Lancashire and South Cumbria. And we can do that, and we can deliver that, and the new hospitals programme gives us the ability to do that. I also think we need to think about how do we undertake elective care, and I do think that will be concentrated on fewer sites, but will be much more efficient in terms of the way that we run our theatres, for instance. So we only run theatres generally 5, perhaps 5.5 days per week. We need to be able to run them 7 days per week for the future, and have them running 12 hours plus every day. So really use our assets in a much more productive and efficient way that gives capacity, that allows patients to be seen much quicker. So I think all of that needs to be worked through. But I also think there needs to be a real focus on community-based services, and particularly things such as frail elderly, long-term conditions. People don't generally need to come into hospital for those conditions. They can be treated much more efficiently and effectively in the community or in their own homes by bringing services to people. So I think what we'll see is a concentration, perhaps centralisation of specialist services, but the general services should be developed much more locally and with a real focus on keeping people fit and healthy and resilient in their own communities, so they don't need to come into hospital. And only then, when they need hospital, will they come in, and those hospitals then will be world-class and outstanding.
The NHS, there seems to be pretty general consensus, is under pressure like never before. How optimistic are you for the future of the service as a whole and Lancashire Teaching Hospitals as the Trust for Central Lancashire?
I am genuinely very optimistic. The NHS is continually under pressure and will continue to be under pressure. The expectations that are placed on it, and quite rightly, grow every year. And that puts pressure on the services and it puts pressure on staff. But every year the NHS manages to cope in the most difficult of circumstances. And I am immensely proud of the staff across Lancashire and South Cumbria, and particularly the staff at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals for the work that they do day in, day out. I think the NHS, I worked in the NHS for 38 years, I think it's something very precious and something that we all should fight for and hold on to. And we don't do everything perfectly. There's a lot that we need to improve. There's a lot of change that we need to put forward. But you know what? I'd rather be, I'd rather have the system that we've got in the NHS than other systems across the world. I think it's an outstanding system.
And if the NHS is set for a transformation, you're set for a personal transformation, aren't you? Heading off to head up the health service in Gibraltar. If it's not an obvious question, what attracted you to those sunny climes?
So I've worked in the NHS for 38 years now, and I've had a fabulous career. I've been immensely lucky, but I actually think it's the right time for me, from a personal perspective, to do something different outside of the NHS, but also for Lancashire and for Lancashire teaching. I think it's a good break point. So over the last couple of years, we have worked incredibly hard to get the business case approved for the new hospital programme. We've now got that approved. We've got the capital secure for a new hospital to be built somewhere in Preston, Chorley, South Ribble area. And all of that's taken an awful lot of hard work and graft to get that to the point it is, but it's now secure. What we now need to think about is the planning for the implementation of the new hospital and all of the service changes that that's going to drive. And that needs somebody who's going to be in the system for 5 to 10 years to really drive that forward. I wish I was 10 years younger. If I was 10 years younger, I would be so up for this challenge and so excited about driving those changes forward. But given where I am in terms of my age, given where I am in terms of my career, I thought it was the wrong thing to do to start the next phase of this transformation and then leave and hand it over. I think it's a natural break point now for me to pass the baton on to somebody else who can come in and can drive the service changes that are going to be required. It's a really exciting role. I think Lancs Teaching is a really good organisation. I think you're going to get a lot of really high caliber candidates who want to take over the CEO role, and I think it's a good time for them to come in.
What would be your biggest challenge in Gibraltar, do you think? A very different health landscape to the UK, obviously.
It's very different, but the challenge is probably the same. The biggest challenge, which is workforce. Healthcare worldwide, every system in the world is really struggling in terms of training enough staff, recruiting enough staff, and having the retention of those staff. So we're in a worldwide market for healthcare. It's really, really difficult to get hold of staff and to keep those staff. And that's exactly the same issue in Gibraltar as it is in the NHS. So it's a different system, it's a different culture, but those workforce pressures would be the same regardless of where you are in the globe. We need to develop systems and keep staff in those systems because staff want to work in them. And I think that's one of the proudest things, and one of the things I'm really proud about in terms of Lancashire Teaching. We've done a lot of work over the last few years in terms of staff morale, supporting staff. And if you look at, in most organisations in the NHS, staff morale and satisfaction is declining. In Lancs Teaching over the last few years, it's been improving, and that's the deliberate effort in terms of trying to do our best to support our staff. We can't meet all of the demands and all the wishes of our staff. National pay negotiations, I can't do anything about that as such, although we have tried to support our staff through those processes. But where we can, we've put an awful lot of effort and energy into developing a positive culture, a culture of trying to do things differently and to support staff.
Kevin McGee, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.